Hello and welcome to another Tuesday night fight. I apologize for the late start. I'm your host, e-rev just add water, apologize there. As always, my co-caster, e-rev Blazing Kami. Tonight we have a little bit of change of pace, 4v4 instead of the standard 6v6. So we're in the server right now on Silo, which will be our first map. For the USSR team, we have Airborne, Night Owl, Dio, and Raid. And over on the American side, we have Desecrator, Heisman, Hellhound, and Tabor Tooth. Or I believe I'm saying that right. Kami, can you give us a quick and brief rundown of the map Silo?
Well, Silo, obviously, for those of you who have watched this map before when we broadcasted it, you've got 4 points here. You've got Gulch, Radar Station, Ridge, and Main Base. Now, Main Base and Radar Station tends to be the main action. However, sometimes teams will push between Ridge and Gulch to try and gain a little bit of ground here, or at least throw the enemy side off. A team that can manage to actually take that point can push the enemy to their spawn, so be looking for that attack when when one side gets really aggressive.
Yeah, definitely. We've cast this map once before, and it was pretty action-packed. Remember, last Sunday we did a special broadcast of Total War going against the massive development team, and that ended up being quite a match with some really close games on our 3 maps. But countdown's going down to 20. Right off the bat, I was on the Russian team, and I saw they're running 2 armors, 1 support, and an air player. So I'm not sure what they're going to do with that strategy. I believe they're probably just going to maybe rush the points and just use the air player for anti.
Well, definitely air players are very effective if they use them with the heavy choppers. They might be going with medium choppers instead, obviously, to just try and counter that the air threat, or just worry about that. I'm not exactly certain, although the American side is coming in with choppers of their own, looks like heavy choppers, plus a scout chopper. So that'll be interesting to see what lands in for the Russian side.
Well, the Russians are running 2 mediums and 2 heavies, so Night Owl's going for his combo, which he always seems to pick. He likes to have that balance, the ability to take down other helicopters as well as the ability to take down tanks, and he does very well with that. But taking a look at Dio, if I pronounce his name wrong, I apologize. He's moving in with a lot of medium tanks. Right off the bat, 4 medium tanks as he moves in. He's taking Main Base, and he's already helped capture Gulch. Fire Station, Night Owl's moved some helicopters up there to hold off the advance from the American team, but Airborne with some armored tanks is moving up there right now. So he's just captured that, so now the Russians have a bleed on the American side. The Americans just have the Ridge, and they're moving over a support armor combo with 4 heavy tanks over towards Main Base, I believe. So they may be able to pull off a victory there, as there's only a few medium tanks holding that.
Well, for the most part, the Russians have come out with a strong start. They've got 5 tickers in their favor on the bleed, and obviously, you know, even though they've got a strong push over in the left, with units already being set up at the main base, they're going to decap it, but still, you know, all it takes is a few helicopters, and here comes the heavies onto the tanks. Although they just avoid the tanks despite the fact that the AA has moved away from them. Obviously, the air player did not see that until now.
Well, that's going to be bad news. Night Owl just has some easy pickings there. If Desecrator can't move down his heavy AA, his team won't be able to capture this point. I mean, they have the ability to capture it right now, but you have your support and armor player just separated by such a wide margin, and I think Hellhound's a little bit disorientated by that. He's trying to get his tanks out of there and back over to Desecrator's heavy anti-air.
Well, definitely that heavy artillery strike lightened up some of those AA vehicles. If he wanted to move in with Hellfires, obviously he hasn't, because it looks like he's bringing in some more heavy attack choppers. Heisman, who is the air player for the Americans, is losing his choppers just from guns from Night Owl. Obviously a great air player, just using his guns to concentrate on the helicopters and wound them, bringing them down slowly. There is AA, and it looks like the Americans are setting up, trying to secure the main base, although the Russians are just going to try and deny them that last circle there.
Well, Airborne, I believe, I guess both the Russian players are running a lot of medium tanks, or actually, scratch that. Airborne's running 3 heavy tanks as he swings around towards the ridge, but he's going to run into some heavy anti-tank infantry from Tooth. But Airborne's is ignoring them, and he's going straight for Ridge. And Ridge has no fortifications at all, so we could see total domination here if Airborne isn't stopped.
Well, definitely, he just went and beelined it. That's why you need to have fortifications on a point like Ridge in the rear, because all it takes is a couple airborne drops, and you'll be able to secure that. The battle right now, the Americans obviously have spread their forces too thin. They're concentrating too much on getting that second point. They forgot about fortifying that ridge, and right now it looks like Airborne is going to drop 2 heavy tanks. As Hellfires drop, they might be able to take down that last tank, but they don't as Ridge goes up for the Soviets.
I don't think Heisman's doing a very good job countering Night Owl. He's just bringing in heavy helicopter after heavy helicopter. He has a scout chopper with him, but he needs to vary his attack force. He's staying really far away from his support players, so if he doesn't have those medium helicopters, he can't really get into the fray, and he can't operate solo when he's up against an air player like Night Owl. And Night Owl's just sitting back, picking off his helicopters one by one. He has Heisman has 2 heavily damaged heavy helicopters, and Night Owl's just hit and running them. Once he recharges his sidewinders, he comes in again, and it looks like Heisman has finally decided to deploy some medium helicopters as Sabertooth, 5 squads of infantry trying to recapture the ridge, I suppose, but they're going to take a while to get there, and they are not anti-tank infantry, so I'm not sure how well they're...
Well, even light infantry has the ability to shoot at tanks, although I believe it's just 1 AT trooper rather than 3 AT troopers, which is still able to fight tanks, but not as effectively. Obviously, that infantry is in the open. There's no vehicle to move them, which means all it takes is one little light artillery strike to knock out all that infantry that are clustered there. The Americans are still struggling right now to grab the main base as light tanks from the Russians are continuously dropping into the circles that are white. It's a good move by the Russians. They're keeping them off balance. They're about to get a total domination here with 5 minutes into it. Very effective maneuver by the Russians.
Well, it looks like the Americans have finally dislodged the ridge hold, and now they've recaptured it, stopping the massive Russian bleed, but the main base is back in Russian hands. All the time, all the resources that were spent trying to get the main base were futile. They wasted so many units, and all they really did was just feed the Russian team TA points. We haven't seen any really big TAs past artillery strikes and some tank busters, so I think maybe the Russians may be stockpiling their TA.
Well, definitely. Right now, the Russians are really just pushing the Americans back. I'm not exactly certain what the Americans were thinking. They haven't really adapted to anything. They just recently, Heisman has just brought in medium choppers, as all his choppers have been wiped out by AA. Definitely good push with the AA from Raid. And pretty much the Americans are still just barely dropping in their reinforcements to try and secure the ridge.
Well, I'm just taking a look at the scores. I mean, the only score on the American side that even beats a Russian score is Desecrator at 270, and he just barely beats out Raid. I mean, the scores are just so one-sided, and we're about to see a total domination here, I believe within this next minute.
Yeah, definitely. Right now, I mean, the American AA is having to push back to their spawn. It's that bad right now. I'm not exactly certain what the Americans were thinking, what exactly they were planning or anything, but obviously it's not working as they're just getting run over, stormed right into their spawn. They're having to fight right back where their units are dropping. It's just a mess right now.
You know, they probably would have done a lot better if, when they attacked the main base originally, the support and armored players stayed together and just waited for reinforcements. You know, they had the unit advantage there, No one could touch them on the Russian side. There was no heavy tanks on the field. All they had to do was just wait it out and just let reinforcements come. But they decided to spread out their forces, and I think it was Desecrator really messed up Hellhound by dividing his heavy AA and sending them all just to sit on one point.
Well, we're going to be switching to power plant here, so hopefully the Americans will be able to bring back a little bit of a better strategy. Obviously, power plant is somewhat similar to Silo for those of you who have played power plant. Obviously, it's the first time that we're casting it, but it has a big empty area in the center, just like Silo. So the strategies might be very much the same for the Soviets.
Well, this is the first time I've played this map. Well, actually, not the first time I've played this map. I haven't played this map very much. I like to stick it generally to the basic maps. I love farmland, but the map looks incredible. So hopefully the Americans can make a comeback here and do something spectacular and bring this back together. It's a quick defeat by the Russians that last map. Only 12 minutes in, a little under 12 minutes in, and it was already total domination. So we're just waiting for everyone to ready up. But I attribute the loss mainly. I'm just looking around at these rosters and I see players I haven't seen play for either team before. So I'm attributing that to some of the disorientation and disorder amongst the American team.
Yeah, definitely. Well, for those of you who are pretty much haven't really played the power plant map very much, I'll go over the map for you. Suburb, you have Suburb, Crash Site, Power Plant, and Train Station. Once again, just like on Silo, Power Plant and Suburb tend to be points that are just freebies. Most teams manage to grab those right off the bat, but they are three-circle points. Most of the action tends to be around the train station in the area between the power plant and the suburb, although occasionally you do get a little bit of action over on Crash Site. However, it tends to be a little bit isolated compared to the other 3 points.
Well, again, still waiting on players to ready up. Let's go ahead and join a team and we can get this underway. Remember, guys, if you're tuned in, go ahead and register on our forums, e-rev.tv. Post in the WIC section. We want to try and get our forum activity up a lot more than it is. It'd really be helping us out if you went in there and posted. And if you're on IRC right now, you can send me a shout out. Our channel is e-rev or pound e-rev on the Game Search Network, so you can go ahead and hit us up. And there we go. Match has started. 20 seconds to countdown. I'll leave it off to you, Colin.
Alright, well, both teams, obviously, the Americans really need to come back from this. There are some good players over on the Russian side. Obviously, you do have a little bit of reinforcement from Airborne as well, who's also a great player. So the Russians they have Night Owl, who's a great air player, as well as Airborne. And you've got Raid over there as well. So good team over with the Russians. Right now, the Americans need to come up with a strong strategy if they intend to win.
Yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at the units being deployed for the Russian team as they're spawning really close. As they spawn right next to power plant, and the NATO forces spawn next to suburb. Right off the bat, looks like Hellhound is going armor. We go ahead and follow him, and looks like he's teaming up with Desecrator again. Desecrator's going for the closest point. Looks like Hellhound will be going to the 2 other points, splitting up his forces. And Heisman going air again. Looks like he has transport helicopters, which I've never seen in a TW match. He's filling them up with 2 infantry, and he has 2 scout helicopters with them. What do you think their plan is right now, Tommy?
Well, it looks like right now from the destination they're going to, it looks like they're going to try and grab the crash site here. The Soviets have really pretty much just ignored the crash site. They've sent 1 truck, probably with an infantry squad, to see if they can secure it. maybe drop an airborne guy in if there's no NATO forces. But for the most part right now, it looks like the Soviets are concentrating on a dominant push, and they're using heavy helicopters to knock out the tanks right now. AA from Desecrator is trying to get over to those heavies. They're putting missiles into them right now. It's dropping flares from, it looks like Airborne's going air this time. Pretty surprising, never seen him in the air roll before. But for the most part, NATO is probably going to get crash site here real quick.
Well, Dio has one truck over there at this moment, so I think that's going to be dispatched really quickly. And with all those infantry in the woods, they should be able to hold it for a relatively long time if the NATO side decides, or the Russians decide to airdrop any units in. And let's go ahead and take a look at the overall map. Looks like train station is in Russian hands, along with the suburb. A few units near the crash site, as I mentioned earlier, but it looks like they're moving a lot of infantry through the city or through the woods towards the power plant. Power plant right now, taking a look at it, not really, or actually there are quite a few units there, but I don't see that many of them trying to fortify the points, so that might be a big problem for them when these Russian troops come to attack.
Well, definitely, fortifications are a huge part of this map. Right now, the NATO team from Hellhound is trying to get around on the flank of Raid. Raid is probably just noticing the flank, and he's trying to adjust to try and grab that circle, while there is one AT fortification that was, and the machine gun fortification was dispatched by a cluster bomb, I believe, and a heavy artillery barrage from Hellhound. Not sure where that dropped. Probably killed a heck of a lot of units.
Well, taking a look at Heisman. Heisman has those transport helicopters right now, not doing much. He's just sitting there, so they need to be either taken back and so he can have more money in his pool, or they need to be put to good use and have some infantry pick up in them. But right off the bat, looks like Raid managed to decap the power plant, so that's given quite a bleed to the Russian side in favor of them. Hellhound's about to resecure the resecure power plant. There we go, the NATO team now has a very slight bleed, but taking a look, Dio has a lot of infantry moving up through the woods. They've just taken up positions around the power plant. Doesn't look like they're really making any moves since they're not anti-tank infantry, just basic infantry, but taking a look at the NATO side, they're really just sitting it back. They're not playing too aggressive. They're happy with Crash and they're happy with the power plant.
Well, obviously, after the defeat they took, right now, obviously, a huge armor push from Hellhound as he got 4 heavy tanks. Some of them have about lieutenant class as well as Desecrator, with a couple AA as well as a repair tank are going to try and decap the train station right now. They've got a pretty strong advantage here. Don't see any Russian choppers right now. Looks like Airborne is over at the crash site. He's just pretty much dropping in some airborne units probably to decap that position, as the Russians do look like they're going to try and make a push from Raid over to the crash site, and there's going to be a little bit of engagement here between Airborne and Heisman as their medium choppers drop flares and launch stingers into each other.
They've overrun the crash site.
Well, looks like Heisman won that battle, but here comes Airborne and Raid. Raid pulling up 3 heavy tanks. There's no real defense. Again, Heisman still has these transport helicopters in the air. I don't know why he has them there. He's not using them. He just has them there. They need to be disbanded, or else he can't really make an effective air attack, as he only has 1 medium helicopter going up against Airborne. It's that helicopter I don't think will win the fight.
Well, right now the NATO team has managed to secure the train station, although their AA was wiped out by a cluster bomb by Night Owl. So right now, all it takes is a few choppers over here to knock out the tanks over at the train station, but it looks like just artillery from the Russian side, 1 heavy artillery piece from Night Owl doing some support work here, just trying to hit those heavy tanks, weaken them a little bit, because those tanks are at general class right now.
Well, Tabor 2 has some airborne infantry near that heavy artillery. I'm surprised maybe he's waiting for the recharge on the direct artillery strike, but I'm surprised he hasn't called it in. He could take down a huge unit right there, which is doing quite a number on these NATO troops. And there you go, a nuke dropped by Hellhound, We haven't seen many TA usage by the NATO side, and there's their first real TA usage, pulling out a big one, pulling out a nuke at crash.
Well, right now, the Soviets, the NATO team does have the bleed right now, but the Soviets are probably going to re-secure the nuke section right now. NATO team does have a lot of infantry trying to push over there, trying to sprint across. Once again, it's just infantry. Infantry is not as fast as vehicles, and obviously the Soviets are bringing in vehicles to try and re-secure the crash site right now, as they also are pushing on the train station and have secured it. So NATO team is in trouble at the moment.
Well, airborne not moving as medium attack helicopters as Tabor 2's infantry are just pulling out their Stinger missiles. If airborne doesn't move those heavy or those medium attack helicopters, he's going to lose them quickly. He's already lost 2. He's about to lose a 3rd one as the anti-armor or anti-tank infantry just ruins those trees relatively unscathed. And there you go, he's about to lose his 4th medium attack helicopter, just feeding TA points this NATO.
Well, it looks like a lot of players right now are in roles that they're not really used to. I'm surprised they haven't mastered pretty much all the roles, although I'm certain there might be occasionally one role that a certain player just doesn't want to play. Right now, the NATO team has a bit of an advantage right now. The Soviets had the advantage before. They've taken the train station, they've got the power plant, they've decapped the suburbs right now, and are fighting right now over at the train station despite the fact the Russians still have it secured.
Well, just look. So train station is in NATO hands. Crash, the most contested point right now, well, actually no longer contested, as Tabor 2 is unable to really make effective use of his anti-tank infantry as they've been taken out. So NATO still has a bleed, significant bleed actually. Well, they did manage to decap the suburbs. I didn't notice that. Raid, just looking at the ranks of his unit, he has 2 general class tanks, so those are going to be very hard to take out, but he has no air cover at all. So if airborne decides to move in some choppers, he's going to do quite a number on those tanks.
Well, right now the Russians are trying to re-secure this suburb right now. There's a massive infantry force as well as lots of artillery and AA trying to do some damage here against those tanks. Obviously, as you mentioned, general class and captain class tanks, definitely very effective armor player. Hellhound, obviously you can tell he's using his Hellfires very effective, his heat rounds very effectively. He's using them on the buildings, using them on the infantry while they're on the open, doing lots of damage to that infantry. So right now, if he can get a repair tank, he can probably keep those tanks alive until all of them go to general class.
Well, airborne has a heavy attack helicopter on the field. He's just not using it. It's deployed at the spawn, ready to come in, and there you go. Raid just called in a heavy airstrike and destroyed 2 of Hellhound's tanks, both his general class tanks and a 3rd tank. So now he's just left with, I believe that's captain class, and that's about to be picked off by some medium attack helicopters. But still, NATO with the bleed. There's 10 minutes and 30 or 20 seconds left in this round, and NATO definitely has the advantage. They've almost secured total domination. If they keep going at this rate, they'll get it in 3 or 4 minutes.
Well, definitely, if NATO is saving up for another nuke, they should probably drop it on the suburb here, since there's the unit. They might lose this flag very quickly. If you set up a nuke on a side section of the map of the point, you won't decap it for, obviously, with that single nuke. But however, as well, they could drop a nuke onto the crash site, but it looks like they're just dropping tanks from the Soviet side onto that point to fortify it.
Well, again, taking a look at Tabor 2, he's again trying for this anti-tank push. He has no normal infantry to run anti-air for him, but he will do quite a number on all these tanks. These light tanks are in the area, but I believe a light artillery strike has been called in by Raid, and those mortar strikes are very effective against infantry. They're trying to sprint away from it, and they did manage to survive, but they have lots of casualties, not nearly as effective as they could have been. But they're about to destroy fortification, hopefully decap this crash point.
Well, definitely the NATO team has done a good job of coming back from the last round. They've gone and taken the 2 points they need. They were a little defensive on the start, but then they made a massive armor push into the suburb as well as the train station, took those points very effectively. Even though that push is down right now, there is more armor from Hellhound. Looks like 4 heavy tanks being pushed up from the spawn through the train station, and they are harassing the crash site right now, knocking out fortifications, trying to decap the points from, looks like Tabortooth. Very effective use of his infantry, just hiding them in the trees, going for the fortifications first.
Alright, there you go. Looks like the power plant has been decapped momentarily by rain. We rushed 2 heavy tanks over to the area, destroyed the few fortifications there, and just decapped the point. So the bleed is heavily in the Russians' favor right now, as I believe they've resecured their suburbs. Yes, they have, and they're making an assault on the train station, which isn't fully fortified. There's no units in the area except for 1 heavy tank by Hellhound who is trying to fortify the position. So the train station will probably fall to Russian hands really quickly. But there you go. Looks like Hellhound's about to recapture the power plant, and there stops that heavy bleed from the Russian team. And I think he's calling in some infantry. Pretty sure that's his. Jabberjaw calling in some, or Jabbertooth calling in some infantry to help secure the point.
Well, definitely right now, even though the bleed is slightly in favor of the Russians, a good push by the NATO team. Looks like they're setting up for another push as heavy artillery is dropping. Most likely looks like the Soviets are trying to rush in 2 squads of infantry from Dio, waiting for the heavy artillery to do its damage. It's knocked out one of the fortifications. It's knocked out some AA. There's no tanks in the area to actually fight, so he's trying to rush his infantry, as it looks like Desecrator is trying to run him over while he's in the open. Looks like an AA piece trying to get at those infantry as they are rushed back into the trees. Obviously a failed attack. Almost got run over there by a lot of AA.
Well, Desecrator is about to lose that heavy AA, and he just does that. But the train site is back in NATO hands. Relatively even match, but NATO definitely, the crash site offers that, just gives you that bleed if it's an even match with that just 1 point. It's not much, but as we saw last Sunday, every point counts with amazing comebacks from the Total War team.
Yeah, definitely Sunday's match. For those of you who are watching, if you haven't seen it yet, go onto the archive and watch it. It was a close match all the way to the very end. Great match to watch. As pretty much we've got heavy tanks from Hellhound. He's trying to get away from Airborne's heavy choppers. I don't know where the AA is. Looks like most of the AA get knocked out. Nope, Desecrator is just dropping in the AA. He's trying to rush it over to the tanks as soon as possible. Still sitting back on spawn.
Yeah. It's just that those few seconds he takes to really react. Those make the difference. Those can make all the difference. Within that time, a Hellfire can be charged, and it just takes 1 Hellfire to really do a number and finish off some heavy tanks. But he's using his heavy aircraft. He's smoked out. He's pushed them forth. He's just taken out 2 of Airborne's heavy helicopters, and it just finishes off a 3rd. So train station in Russian hands, but it can easily go back into NATO's hands as Hellhound and Desecrator work together. 3 heavy tanks up against, 3 infantry squads. The infantry won't stand a chance. None of them are anti-tank infantry, just have a few airborne infantry. And here it comes. Desecrator also following up with 2 repair tanks, which I haven't really been paying attention to them, but Kami, has he been using them effectively?
He has been using the repair tanks effectively with his AA, but for the most part it seems like Hellhound and Desecrator just haven't really been working together. They've been separated after that first initial push from NATO. They were separated for quite a bit here. NATO team has managed to decap the crash site, which will give them the bleed as well as secure the train station. But Desecrator and Hellhound really need to get their AA and tanks together. They're dropping them in separately. They're moving out separately. They're not really waiting for each other right now. Mostly, it's a good job by the Soviet side by just using their tactical aid to hit the AA first and then using choppers to wipe out the tanks.
Well, honestly, I really think for this match for the NATO team, not to hit on any of their other players, but I think Hellhound is really carrying the team. I mean, I think he's been lucky that Airborne's running air. I'm surprised that the way Airborne is playing as an air class, he just seems very unresponsive with it. But Hellhound's been, with a bit of luck and a lot of skill, he's just been able to run around with his tanks without that extra team support and decap points and capture points as we saw at the suburb.
Well, definitely. Well, the Soviets have pretty much just have 2 fortifications here on the crash site. They're just bringing in some more choppers from airborne, some medium choppers, try and knock out some of this infantry in the open, as well as the light tank being dropped. But for the most part, dropping in NATO is new units to try and push over there, as they're using air units, mostly heavy choppers, to try and knock out the transports as well as the fortifications. As heavy artillery barrage drops on the suburbs, possible push from the train station maybe. I don't see any tanks, just one tank from Hellhound, so I doubt it, but they might be trying to just knock out the fortifications and then push in some AA to just decap the point.
Well, it looks like Desecrator is actually sitting some units on there with Hellhound at the train station trying to fortify these points of well, which will happen soon with the amount of units they have. Nuclear power plant still really no fortifications. The 2 points that do have fortifications just have machine gun fortifications. And so they're also missing out on the few TA points you get from fortifying those points. But here comes Hellhound with a few more heavy tanks up to the train station. The Russians do have a bleed again as they've recaptured the crash site, but not very significant, and they need a more significant bleed if they want to win this with the 2 minutes and 30 seconds left on the clock.
Well, definitely. The NATO team has just brought in a massive infantry force once again from Tabortooth, who's going to try, obviously, it looks like one of the points, the closest point to him, has no fortifications on it, so all he needs to do is 1 infantry there. Raid's trying to get on it with a heavy tank as Airborne comes in with Stingers chasing off Heisman, knocks out all his heavy choppers. Very good mover. It looks like he's going to try and pick off some of this infantry, but they've got Stingers of their own trying to fire up into the sky, and pretty much Airborne as well as Raid is going to try and hold off that infantry as long as possible so that they don't lose the bleed here.
And there you go, Chemical Strike right there, taking out, stopping the infantry from pushing up the hill. Now, I don't think Jabber is really trying to decap or trying to capture the whole point. I think what he's doing successfully is forcing the Russians to dedicate units up on the crash site to defend it, because if they don't, they're just going to get picked off. And all those units up there, looks like even Raid has had to call in amphibious transports just to run the anti-infantry role. And those are tanks that aren't over near the suburb helping defend it. And the suburb's under heavy attack right now by Hellhound, who's just decapped it with the help of Desecrator. They can capture this point easily right now. No units defending it. The fortifications have been taken out. So I think it's safe to assume NATO will take this round.
Definitely. All it needs is that last tank on that last point, as it's just close moving toward that point. Good job by the NATO team using that infantry as a distraction over at the crash site in order to get tanks over to the suburb while they were light. So definitely, I assume this round is going to be going for the NATO team in the next 35 seconds.
One great thing about infantry is that they're powerful. I mean, they're slow, and tanks can take them out from a range, but you can't really afford to ignore infantry. If you ignore them for a second, they'll come up and bite you in the ass. And that's what the Russians learned early on in this match. And it looks like NATO will come out with the victory, as we have 10 seconds left on the clock. This the last few skirmishes. Looks like Night Owl is just running in his heavy artillery to the suburb, just running them around.
The suburbs are under our control.
Well, the top players for the match are Hellhound with 1453, Desecrator with 1308, Night Owl with 1150. Obviously some good scores. Not necessarily the best we've seen, but still some pretty good scores here, as NATO team takes the win with 72.73%.
What is our, do you know what our third map of the night is?
I believe the third map for tonight is I believe it has more than 4 points. It should be about 5 points, or 4 or 5 points, not completely sure. I haven't played Quarry in a while.
Well, this is again is another NATO versus Russian map. I'll give it back to you, Kami, to give a map overview.
Well, I'm just loading up myself, so I'm waiting for the map to come up, and once it does, I'll give you the map overview.
Well, I'll go ahead and give you what I can see. Looks like we have two 3-point captures, gold mine and rail yard, and at either side, I believe those are the spawn points. Radar for the Russian side, and over near Camp HQ, that's where the NATO team will be spawning. There's your two 2-point captures. So, as I lack the combat experience on this map, I'll leave it to Kami to tell you that aspect of it.
Alright, once again, a 4-point map: radar, rail, coal mine, and Camp HQ. Now, unlike the other two maps, the action really is everywhere. Every single point on this map gets attacked. It usually does. So radar, obviously, and coal mine tend to get the most action right off the start, but pretty soon rail yard as well as Camp HQ will be attacked readily.
Remember, guys, if you if you're tuned in, go ahead and go to e-rev.tv, sign up for the forums. Remember, last Sunday we had a special broadcast, Total War versus Massive. It's in the archive. It's ready to be downloaded. We used the broadcast tools on that thanks to Mayday, so the match looks absolutely spectacular. It was a great match all around by both teams, so go ahead if you're interested or if you wanted to know where to get that. It's in the e-rev archives under WIC. Looks like I believe one of their players is AFK, but I'll go ahead and ready up, and hopefully it looks like it's Heisman who's AFK, so we'll have to wait for him. What are your thoughts, just based off looking at the roles the teams have selected, Kami? What do you think the strategy for the Russian team will be?
Well, the Russians right now, they have 2 tanks plus a support and an air. I've seen that a lot from the Russians. They don't like to use infantry too much. They just like to go with the strong unit for each different, role. Tanks just concentrating ground, AA concentrating on air, air concentrating tanks. So for the most part, the Russians are just using their typical strategy for a 4v4, 2 tank players to deal with the ground, as well as an air and a support with lots of AA to try and follow up that unit. As Raid is coming in, Raid for the Soviets, who's going to be doing the air, is once again coming in with a half and half, mediums and heavies, mixed force there. Once again, a very stable force, able to attack ground units as well as air units. And infantry from Sabertooth looks like he's going to rush them in. He's not using any vehicles to try and get him in. He might be just trying to set up for a sneak attack, possibly wait for the enemy to get complacent over at the Camp HQ before he moves in. As AA and arm pushing onto the rail yard right now. And it looks like right off the bat, Raid is making a beeline, trying to get over, trying to knock out some tanks. He sees the AA, he backs off a little bit. Nope, he drops his Hellfires, trying to hit off of Hellhound, as Desecrator has once again left Hellhound alone, just barely bringing up the AA. And Raid moves his helicopters in the wrong direction as Stingers take out both of his heavy helicopters. Bad move by Raid.
Well, taking a look over at Camp HQ, looks like Sabertooth has moved up his infantry. He has them in the woods. Really no units from Night Owl is actually running army. He has medium tanks, which have the ability to be good against infantry, but they're just getting picked off by Sabertooth's anti-tank squads, and Raid can't really do much up against these infantry toting the Stinger missile. And Night Owl, again, he's not really running over the infantry. I think that would be the best solution for him to do right now. He's trying to battle it out with them gun for gun, and he's doing it close range, and that won't end well, and he's about to lose another heavy tank.
Well, right now, the reason why he couldn't run over those units, if you look in real close, they've actually got some AT fortifications that have backed off, and good move by the infantry, just hiding there, kept the tanks from being able to run them over, otherwise they would have fallen into those traps. So for the most part, good maneuver by the by Tabortooth with his infantry, although he ended up losing a lot, as a huge push from Hellhounds as well as Desecrator. Once again, they're just doing the support armor combo, though it looks like the AA took the lead that time. Good job by them being able to realize that the choppers were coming in first.
Well, Hellhound and Desecrator, again, you see them, they're splitting up their forces, you know, they're capturing both the points, which is what you need to do, but they're dividing up their forces to do it, and if you look, the space in between them is enough for heavy helicopters to come in and use their Hellfire missiles and get a rocket barrage off before the anti-air can respond.
Well, they're lucky right now. There are no air units on the NATO side at the moment. They're probably just bringing them in, as right now the Soviets don't have any air units right now, and the NATO team is pretty much pushing really hard. Even though they've lost both of the side points right now, they are trying to put some units on there. But the NATO team has made a good job of just trying to slow them down and just push into the points really hard.
Well, it's like the NATO team, they're trying to capture the core, or the mine, the main mine, the coal mine, but they just don't have that unit up on the hill where there's a machine gun fortification. Desecrator has a repair tank up there, but it's not going to be able to take down the fortification. And then you have Hellhound with his tanks in the area, again, spread out really far from Desecrator. Desecrator looks like he's finally responding, bringing over his heavy AA, but not before Raid spots those tanks. He loses his heavy helicopter, but he does manage to get off a few pot shots. And the Russians still have the bleed on the NATO team. NATO team just battling all across the map. Tabor's lost all his infantry near at Camp HQ. I believe they're smoked or blazed out by a napalm strike.
Well, definitely. Right now, the NATO team has just been trying to get some heavy pushes with some tanks and some AA. Problem is that they're getting just too concentrated on one single point at a time. The NATO team just has to delay them, and then they go after the other points. As you saw, they pretty much took over the radar as well as the Camp HQ, even though they've lost the units there that are trying to fortify it from heavy choppers. They've done a good job of just avoiding the main central attacks and pretty much attacking the area where the enemy is not.
Well, it's like Tabor's making another assault over at, I believe that's the radar, and he's going up against one tank from airborne and a bunch of fortifications, but the time he takes on battling his fortifications will allow airborne to pull up more heavy tanks, which is what he's doing right now, and Dio is giving him some support with some heavy AA. And back at the coal mine, looks like Desecrator is actually working with Hellhound a bit more. He has a repair tank sitting on one of Hellhound's heavy tanks, but looks like they're leaving anti-air up to Heisman, who has some heavily damaged helicopters just rotating around the coal mine. I'm not sure if he'll be able to really make a successful defense against Raid's helicopters.
Well, definitely, though, it was a good move by Night Owl, just going right for the circle, avoiding, the units, bypassing them. Right now, they have decapped the quarry. One of the big problems with quarry is that one circle all the way up on the top is so far away. You have to get a unit all the way around to sneak up and grab that last circle on the quarry, which makes it a hard point to push for. So, for the most part right now, the Soviets do have the advantage, since NATO is trying to concentrate on that point, as being able to just have to worry about that single circle, and as long as they do that, they can keep NATO off that point.
Well, looks like we have 2 light tanks being called in at the coal mine, but no light tanks being called in at all to the hill point, which surprises me. Oh, those are actually Russian light tanks, so that's how I saw those. But again, like, the NATO has control of the coal mine pit. They have the heavy tanks, they have the AA, and they've been winning all the battles there, but they just really, all Desecrator's doing is setting up, running a few AAs up there, hoping to get the hill point, but there's no real push by the team to decap it. It looks like we have an airdrop, so that might be the move. Looks like, yeah, Hellhound has dropped airborne infantry, and they're being run over by Dio's tanks. Dio just ran them all over with his heavy AA, so that's going to be a hard one to take.
Well, definitely he should have dropped them into the forest and used the artillery strike to wipe them out. Right now it looks like radar has gone for the, or Camp HQ has gone for the NATO team right now. They've managed to use some infantry from Tabortooth to secure one of the circles. Looks like just one fortification over there on the last circle, if they can just take that. As radar as well is pretty much been decapped as well. So the bleed is going back in favor for the NATO, and just as I say that, the Soviets Desecrator dropping a nuke on Night Owl, Raid, and Dio just on the quarry, just wiping out tons of units. Good job by him. He needs to follow up that attack with some units. However, the hill point is still under control by the Soviets.
Well, I don't think he has any units to follow it up. I'm just looking around the map. I don't see him at all anywhere. I think he's just waiting to deploy. So he might have wanted to wait for more Russian troops to be in the coal mine and waited for troops of his own to be ready to be deployed. I think him and Hellhound are deploying in right now, as I see a lot of infantry being parachuted in. And Heisman really, he just comes back to his spawn and waits there, waiting for his helicopter reinforcement. He's not really just running around the map taking pot shots. He's just waiting to build up a big attack forces before he does anything. And I think a lot of the moves this team is making is because they're not really used to playing with each other, and they're being very counterproductive. Like I said, Desecrator and Hellhound really having the good positioning, but again, they're not working together. They're splitting up the heavy AA and the heavy tanks, and there's a prime example of it right now. Desecrator failing to really follow Hellhound, as Hellhound's outpacing his units as he moves over to the radar site.
Well, definitely right now, Night Owl has managed to decap the Camp HQ, which will give the bleed back to the Soviets as 10 minutes are about to pass here. NATO team is struggling a little bit right now. The Russians have done a good job of countering them, despite the fact that NATO has put up good coordinated strikes between their AA and tanks. Problem is they're not able to react as quickly. Once they get to those circles, they start separating their AA and their tanks, and that's when they start picking off the AA first and then go after the tanks with choppers.
Well, it's happening right now. Hellhound knows he has a little bit of support from Heisman, but no direct heavy AA support from the ground, which is really the best option against helicopters in some cases. And there you go, radar station being decapped, so it can go back into the Russian hands, or NATO hands if they play their cards right. They seem to take down a machine gun fortifications. Heisman's battling off the raid. He just succeeds in forcing his medium helicopters to be destroyed. He's going to go ahead and focus his attention at Raid's heavy attack helicopters, which have just managed to take down three heavy tanks with a combination of a precision strike from Night Owl, precision artillery, and radar station goes to the NATO team, and they've stopped the bleed. It's a dead stalemate at this stage. Camp HQ is in Russian hands. The quarry is in Russian hands. Radar site is in NATO hands, and I believe their spawn point, rail yard, is in their hands as well.
Well, Dio is doing actually a good job. He's using his light artillery to just try and pound the positions where the enemy is trying to set up fortifications. The nearest circles, as you can see, Hellhound, one heavy tank, is getting hit by artillery. Hellhound has to worry about that because he needs to get his fortifications up, but at the same time, he's got to deal with those tanks and that artillery. Just bringing in some heavy attack choppers from Heisman might run into Raid's heavy and medium attack choppers. Going to be some exchange of stingers here real quick.
I think Heisman has the majority of medium attack helicopters, so he should have the advantage in this match. But I think Raid's just going as fast as possible. Oh, there you go. Desecrator coming. Oh, Raid pulling in a brutal air-to-air strike on Heisman. I think he took down all but one of his helicopters, but Desecrator is right there on the ground with his heavy anti-air. And looks like an airborne drop by Dio. He has a chance to decap the point, and I think he did that, and he's retreated his troops back into the forest, so he has that ability to drop that direct artillery strike and take down a few units if he chooses to. I believe we might see it soon.
Well, 8 minutes into the... Well, 8 minutes in, pretty much you've got this NATO team still struggling. One of the circles over at the rail yard has been secured right now by the Soviets. They've managed to push the enemy off of the camp base. Tabortooth just dropping a cluster bomb, trying to knock out some of those fortifications, maybe dropping an airborne unit or something. But for the most part, the Soviets, as I've mentioned, have been avoiding the main central attacks by the NATO team. They're just going after the points. Once the NATO team launches its main offensive, every time the Russians just counter at a different position and just grab a circle or something like that, and pretty much just slowing down the NATO team, slowly bringing up the bleed and slowly bringing the flag further to the right side for the Soviets.
Well, they now have a significant bleed, as you're saying. They have a 3-point bleed, about 7 minutes left on clock, 6:50 actually. And the NATO team, again, not really at all through this map building any momentum. You know, they've gotten 1 or 2 tick bleed points in their favor.
Well, definitely they're bringing up their AA. They're trying to bring up their tanks to pretty much counter these, pushes by the Soviets, but they're just too concentrated right now. Once the NATO team makes an assault, the Russians attack in the opposite direction, which means that they really have to spread out their forces and are pretty much playing to the way that the Russians want to play. They're having to adapt to where the Russians are attacking rather than pretty much the Russians adapting to them. As the ticker is 5 points in favor of the Soviets, as it's almost to the edge of the map with 6 minutes left.
Well, I'm pretty sure we can go ahead and chop this one up as a victory for the Russians. I'm just taking a look. NATO has units spawning in right now, but no tanks on the field at all. Tabor has a lot of infantry up at Camp HQ, but again, they just, without trucks to drive them around the place, they don't have the speed necessary to decap many points. And that's what's required right now. And taking a look, it looks like Night Owl has a lot of armored transports pushing the rail yard. They have the ability to do some light damage to air units, so they'll make Heisman plays there just a little bit more reserved. And Night Owl doing a great job holding off the push, and I think we're going to see a total domination about 10 seconds here.
Yeah, it looks like it is 5 minutes go past. A real quick match here, probably on the 15-minute mark. We're going to see a Soviet victory, as I do not see the NATO team coming back from this. It's clear and simple that the Russians just simply outplayed the NATO team this match. They just obviously kept them at their pace. They just constantly attacking the positions where the NATO was not. And the winners and pretty much the scores for tonight are Desecrator 1349, Dio 890, and Night Owl 810.
Well, again, I chopped this up as being, I don't see many of these players on normally for Tuesday night fights, so I think they're not used to playing with each other. Plus, we're playing 4v4 format, and Tuesday night fights and Total Wars generally are played with more players, so you're used to the having extra players, having 2 armored players, having infantry players, and even possible multiple air players to rely on to help out.
Well, definitely, obviously, 2-1 victory for the Soviet team. Good job.
Alright, guys, Kami, do you have any closing thoughts before we head out for the evening?
Well, not really. Obviously, these players are, a few of them obviously haven't been seen on Tuesday night fights until now. They're just their first matchup for the most part on e-rev, so, hopefully next time they'll be able to show a little bit better of a skill.
Alright, there you have it. I'm e-rev just add water, and you have e-rev Kami, can't get that out of my head. As we're going to go ahead and sign off for the night. Big thanks to Limek for running video for us. As always, does a fantastic job. Remember, every Tuesday night we're going to run Tuesday night fights. A little bit of a change. Last Sunday in our special Glen Airborne announced that we would be, that Total War would be hosting a type of clan tournament. So if you're tuned in and you have players and you don't really play Total War, well, this tournament's open up to all clans. They just want you to hop on the Total War site. You don't have to really play Total War. It's just an independent tournament with some nifty prizes. Actually, prizes that I think are actually better than cash prizes. You have signed copies of World in Conflict, but from the development team, which I think is a much more unique prize than getting $100 or $200. Alright, so for the e-rev casting team, we're out for the